Good morning, Rise and Freedom. I'm Austin Peterson. You're watching and listening to the Wake Up America show at wakeupAmericaShow.com. Happy Monday. Today is October the 16th, 2023, and we're glad to have you here. Don't forget to click that like button as you file in. It's the price of admission, as we like to say. And if you enjoy the content that you're viewing today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel here at rumble.com/AP for Liberty. We'd love to have you come back and join us every Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central Time. All right, let's get this show on the road. Will Hamas support from the American left signal the death of woke? Don't get too excited. We've got bigger problems in some ways. Over the weekend, the libertarian movement exploded with rage at me, your host, AP, for suggesting that some people in the liberty movement might be useful idiots or possibly even paid shills for foreign regimes. Well, too many libertarians came out and decided that rather than requiring me to submit the evidence, that some of them openly claim that there is actually not only a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas, but Israel is actually worse than Hamas. The cringe has been very strong over the weekend, but they say Austin has no proof to support his accusations. Well, guess what? AP's been around a long time, and AP knows all. I got the receipts, baby. We'll talk about that a little bit later. John Miltimore is going to be joining me this morning at 8 a.m. Central Time. We'll hear from John Miltimore. He's the managing editor of the Foundation for Economic Education. You don't want to miss him this morning at 8 a.m. Central Time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these stories today at 573-319-1586. Again, you can text the Wake Up America show anytime, Monday through Friday from Monday through Friday. You can actually just text me night or day because I check that text line. Sometimes I see people text me in the evenings and I read them. So you can text us at 573-319-1586. One listener asked a question. This is just kind of a house cleaning kind of question. Somebody says, I see two Rumble channels. Are they both you? Yes, they are. One is my personal Rumble account, and the other one is the channel page. And the channel page is rumble.com/AP for Liberty, and the other one's like /C/AP for Liberty. It can be confusing, and I get it. Just remember that the channel page is the one where we stream the show from, and that's where we'd like to earn your subscribe and your like. at rumble.com/AP4Liberty. All right, so let's go ahead and get this show on the roads. President Joe Biden sat down with an extensive interview with 60 Minutes over the weekend or on Friday about the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And we are going to dissect this interview, and I do have some of the best of or slash worst of the president's interview on 60 Minutes. We'll just say, of course, that he's not looking well. But the main thrust of this piece today, of course, is the title of this show, which is the question of whether or not the support of Harvard law students, who many of them are grad students, writing a letter of support for the terrorist attacks by Hamas will actually signal the death of Americans that have been arguing that that many institutions see that their support for wokeism is akin to sort of keeping the viper to their breast, a little too close to their breast, and that many of them now regret their support for woke leftist policies that have allowed these anti-Semites in their ranks. Now, the libertarian question to this one, which I know some of you are interested in, but I think most people are probably not interested in because most people don't pay attention to what libertarians think or care what we think. And I will be explaining a little bit later some of the more, well, here's a $5 word for you, Camellia, the internecine squabbles in the libertarian movement related to somebody make impact on national policy and people actually listen to what leftists have to say about things, despite my disagreements with them. I think that we should probably focus on that since what they say actually matters, and nobody gives a shit what libertarians think, not even other libertarians. And I am one. So let's move on from that topic first and talk about someone who people actually listen to, Bill Maher, who actually, I think, did a damn good job of zeroing in on this issue and vocalizing what I think a lot of people who are liberals, or at least on the left, at least reasonable, moderate liberals, believe compared to the woke left. Take a listen.
I just want to finish with the values first, because it's just amazing to me that the American left, so much of it, throws their lot in with people whose values I hope they don't share, but let's go through them. Because values and customs make a difference, okay? And the people of Gaza, by the way, if the Israelis did get rid of Hamas, they'd be doing a giant favor to the people of Gaza who hate Hamas too. But let's just go through the list. Because the Israelis look like us in most ways, values-wise. Maybe we're not doing it the right way. I don't know. Religious tolerance. That doesn't exist in Gaza. You're either Muslim or an infidel, and you better be a Muslim. Female freedom, free and fair elections, free speech, gay rights. I see these Queers for Palestine.
Did you hear their sister organization, Blacks for the KKK?
It's like...
By the way, I'm a gay man. I've lived in Berlin. This is a level of masochism that even I cannot comprehend.
And let's pause for just a moment here, because this is Jamie Kirchick. For those of you who don't know who this is, this gentleman, this is Jamie Kirchick. Now, I've never been the biggest fan of Jamie Kirchick. Obviously, he's a neocon and I'm a libertarian. But I used to hate Jamie Kirchick with a passion. And without going too much into the past, and certainly I haven't let bygones be bygones to a certain extent. For those of you who were involved, or at least awake and involved in politics way back in 2008, Jamie Kirchick was the person who initially published the Ron Paul newsletters. He didn't publish them himself, but he brought them to light before the Iowa caucus back in 2008. And his article was the one that I think probably deep-sixed Ron Paul's chances of winning the Iowa Republican caucus way back in 2008. And again, without getting too much into the nitty-gritty details, I will say that after this gentleman, Jamie Kirchick, published those articles displaying many of the things that had been published in the Ron Paul newsletters back in the 1990s, half of my Ron Paul 2008 staff in New York City quit the campaign and left the headquarters. Of course, many of whom were black or of different varying ethnicities, largely because they were upset at what they had read. Jamie Kirchick was the person who brought those newsletters to light, and I hated his guts for it. But it did start my journey because of Jamie Kirchick. It started my journey doing deeper dives and investigations into some of the darker parts of the libertarian movement. So I find this fascinating, right? So the thing is that with people like Jamie Kirchick and other neocons and others, is that I don't agree with their interventionist warmongering policies, despite whatever retarded Dave Smith take you might have heard that I support interventionism. If you followed this, the hubbub over the weekend. But I listen to what my opponents have to say, right? And I consider what they have to say because it's the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without necessarily accepting it. And I think that part of the major reason that the libertarian movement has failed so spectacularly, rather than to have a libertarian moment as we thought we would have in 2016, is largely because of the retardation of the libertarian movement and their inability to reflect and to look at itself objectively, to consider what it is that we truly believe, what is it that are our true values or principles. But of course, that would require a self-reflection, and most people don't do that. It's not just a problem of the liberty movement, but I do think that it is part of the problem of that has led to the intellectual retardation of the libertarian movement, pejoratively and descriptively. Sad to see that a left liberal and a neocon have nailed the proper moral perspective in regards to Israel and Hamas, and doing so in attacking the woke, which is, of course, where libertarians should be. We should be united in attacking the woke leftists who are actually supporting acts of terrorism. But unfortunately, that's not where some of my should-be allies are at this morning. If you're just tuning into the morning, don't forget to send us a text at 573-319-1586. One listener texted in, said, "Good morning, AP." Well, good morning to you. Top of the morning to you. All right, let's continue.
Right. I mean, you know what? I'm going to get... can I just finish my list of pedophilia? I'll put that under don't ask. Child brides and so forth. Equality of the sexes, I'll categorize that under don't make me fucking laugh. The fact that, you know, these people think that this is where they should be aligned with, that these are the values that you support?
I think this past week has been a real important moment for a moral reckoning on the American left. Because there is a small, and I'm going to emphasize that, a very small, but growing and extremely loud faction on the American left that has revealed itself.
I don't know how
to
small
be
anymore.
Okay, well, I mean...
Yeah, I agree. How small is it, Bill? Let's be honest. And I loved this gay dude's take on this in regards to foreign policy when he is attacking the woke left in regards to the queers for Palestine. Take a listen.
I think it's a little ironic that the people who seem to be defending Hamas online are also the ones they'd be most likely to kill. Oh, no, I'm sure the Islamic terrorists would love you, queer intellectual feminist. We're freedom fighters. They're fighting for their land, and I'm fighting for my right to purple hair. What the fuck? It's like a girl in a really toxic relationship. I know you don't like him because he kidnaps and murders people, but trust me, when I'm alone with him, he is such a sweetheart. I'm sorry, if your reaction to people being slaughtered, beheaded, raped, and burned alive isn't complete and utter disgust and horror, if your reaction is, yeah, but I mean, why? See it from their perspective. You need to get your fucking head checked, okay? I'm sure Jeffrey Dahmer had a rough childhood. That doesn't mean I empathize with him. If you want to free Palestine from Hamas.
Think about this. How hilarious is that? First of all, that was freaking hilarious. But it is, right? So if he's trying to, the problem is that he's a man, so he may be a gay man, but he's still a man. So he's probably not the type of person who would write to a mass murderer in prison. So not to like pull out the woman hating card here, but if you think about it, I mean, it's not men who write to serial killers in prison and fall in love with killers in prison. So probably a lot of these queer feminists for Palestine, right? These leftist liberal females, a lot of their infatuation with Hamas has to do with that same kind of instinct that makes them love serial killers. If you know what I mean. I mean, am I off base with this? By the way, if you disagree with what I'm saying this morning, I'd love to hear from you because I listen to people who disagree with me and we can talk it out. You can send us a text at 573-319-1586. As a matter of fact, I am not afraid to be confronted about my views. As a matter of fact, I always enjoy being the lone man in the arena, standing up against everybody who disagrees and booing and throwing fruitcake at me and screaming and saying, Austin, terrible. Oh, you're a neocon, you're a leftist, you're a communist, whatever. I enjoy that because usually by the time the battle is done, I've won the crowd over to my side. And that's why I've committed to a debate with Dave Smith this week. Looking forward to it. And we'll be, I think, I'm not sure if it'll be live, but we will at least be recording it tomorrow night. And then tomorrow morning, I will be doing a discussion with you, or you'll be just seeing a discussion. I'm going to pre-record with Liberty Lock Pod. Some of you might know Clint Russell. He and I will be having, I guess a debate, but a discussion about what I was saying over the weekend, because he also believes that I'm being disingenuous. Dave Smith was actually lying about my positions, whereas I think that Clint Russell was actually just confused about my positions. But Dave was accusing me of being an interventionist, right? But again, the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without considering it. Most of my views when it comes to foreign policy are informed by trying to understand why certain nation states and individuals or groups believe what they believe and to consider where they're coming from. I think that the problem with the libertarian movement, of course, is that they don't do that. And they just label anything that disagrees with them as neocon interventionist, which I see as a large part of the retardation of liberty movement. That and the actual open anti-Semites and those who actually openly support Russia, which is probably not the majority of them. But that doesn't mean that there aren't also some useful idiots. And of course, this is very much a sore spot with the liberty movement, which has an inferiority complex largely for good reason, in that it hasn't been able to accomplish any of the political goals, and that most of the political goals of the libertarian movement that have been accomplished by people who are not libertarians. A larger discussion that we'll have this morning at 8 a.m. Central Time with our friend John Miltimore, the managing editor of the Foundation for Economic Education, the editor at large, and he'll be joining us this morning at 8 a.m. Central Time. Speaking of woke leftists, I'm sure everybody agrees that SNL over the weekend, Pete Davidson, we were all, hotly waiting for his opinion on the Israel and Hamas conflict. Let's take a listen.
This week, we saw the horrible images and stories from Israel and Gaza. And I know what you're thinking. Who better to comment on it than Pete Davidson? Well, in a lot of ways, I am a good person to talk about it because when I was 7 years old, my dad was killed in a terrorist attack. So I know something about what that's like. I saw so many terrible pictures this week of children suffering, Israeli children and Palestinian children. And it took me back to a really horrible, horrible place. And, no one in this world deserves to suffer like that, especially not kids, After my dad died, my mom tried pretty much everything she could do to cheer me up. I remember one day when I was 8, she got me what she thought was a Disney movie, but it was actually the Eddie Murphy stand-up special, Delirious. And we played it in the car on the way home, and when she heard the things Eddie Murphy was saying, she tried to take it away. But then she noticed something. For the first time in a long time, I was laughing again. I don't understand it. I really don't, and I never will. But sometimes comedy is really the only way forward through tragedy. My heart is with everyone whose lives have been destroyed this week. But tonight, I'm going to do what I've always done in the face of tragedy, and that's try to be funny. Remember, I said try. And live from New York, it's Saturday night.
I like that, actually. I thought that was pretty good. I'll give him a round of applause for that. Now, I know a lot of people are saying things like, oh, well, he should have condemned Hamas or he wasn't pro-Israel or whatever it is. But I have to say that I think that the overall point of that really stands, because I remember when my mother died when I was 14 years old, that it was really a problem for me to try and find, my happy place, or to try to get back to a place where I could laugh again. And my friends, who were my closest best friends, knew that I was frequently, depressive for a brief period, not for a long period, but I spent a lot of times at my best friend's house rather than at my own home, because my own home, of course, reminded me of my mother. But it was comedy that actually helped to break me out of my funk. It was comedy, like, Pete Davidson has said here, that helped me to get over the fear that I felt, the anger, the rage, the hatred, the sort of like, and also just the opposite of all those emotions, the non-emotions, the numbness that you feel whenever you have a great experience, a great loss in your own life personally. And you know what? Sometimes even the most inappropriate of jokes or comedy can sometimes be what it takes to actually snap you out of your funk. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to sound completely inappropriate. And if you're not in my situation, it can sound inappropriate. But if you can't sort of understand the dark humor that drives me, I've always been a fan of dark humor. The darker, the better. The more macabre, the better, right? And most people don't really appreciate the kind of humor that I appreciate. I really enjoy dark humor and always have. But I will never forget my friend Phil. One day we're sitting on, and he would sometimes, I would sort of lapse, like everything would be fine, and then all of a sudden I would just kind of like, phase out a little bit, and my friends were respectful of that. And I had good friends who were more like lighthearted and airy, whereas Phil was really more of my kind of like dark humor friend. And we were talking about something, and I can't remember how we got to this, but I'll never forget Phil said, "Well, at least my mom didn't die," which sounds like a really hateful thing to say. But in the context of when he said it and how he said it, I started laughing so hard that it completely broke me out of my funk. And I realized that, I couldn't sit around feeling sorry for myself about the situation that I had been handed in life. And I realized that I needed to self-regulate, and I needed to try and go on with my life and to try and laugh again. As a matter of fact, and without getting too personal, I'll tell you one other brief little story, and then we're going to move on to President Joe Biden's interview on 60 Minutes, train wreck, of course, and tell you the story of the neighbors across my street. When my wife and I moved into our home just a couple of years ago, we got to know the man who lived across the street, very nice gentleman who worked as a nurse in the local hospital. And unfortunately, he was sadly killed in a tragic motorcycle accident. He has two sons. They still live there across the street from us, and they mow our lawn sometimes in our front field. And they're very good kids. And it's sad to see them having to grow up without a father. I know what it feels like at their age to lose a parent. And the advice that I could give to them in their loss was just to say, from my own experience, which is all I could think to say, is that they will be happy again, that they will experience joy again, that love and happiness and joy and those emotions that feel so far away from them, laughter, things like that, that those will return, that happiness will come again, and that they will be happy again, despite how they were feeling, of course, in that great moment of loss and that confusion that I felt at their age when I lost my own parent. So I actually really appreciated what Pete Davidson had to say on SNL, because, of course, he does have to do his job, and he does have to be a comedian and to make jokes and to help people to move on. And sometimes some of these jokes might be dark, and they might not fit necessarily some preconceived narrative that one partisan or another would like to place on top of them. But I do think that there is a place for humor in the world, even when things are at their darkest. As a matter of fact, I think it's largely required. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to dark humor, the next part of this segment that we're going to talk about this morning, President Joe Biden's interview on 60 Minutes, is not the kind of humor that we want to, it's more laugh to keep from crying. Take a look and listen. Let's react to some of these clips.
Rarely does a president confront so much peril. The catastrophe in Israel, the war in Ukraine, and no help from a paralyzed Congress. Late Thursday, we met President Biden at the White House. It had been a rough week, and we could see it on him. Mr. Biden will be 81 next month, and he has said that when he's tired, his lifelong stutter can creep back in. But he wedged us into his schedule to express his commitment to Israel after the massacre of more than 1,000 civilians 8 days ago. Rarely
Yikes. Okay, so what's the key part there, this last part?
his commitment to Israel after the massacre of month, and he has said that when he's tired, his lifelong stutter can creep back in.
When he's tired, his lifelong stutter can creep in. Now, I've gotten a lot of crap from people for saying that I think that Donald Trump would be handling these things much better. As a matter of fact, I think probably many of these things might not have happened at all if Donald Trump were still commander-in-chief. I can't necessarily say that about this, but I do think much more strongly that it's unlikely that Vladimir Putin would have intervened, would have been a big government interventionist neocon when it came to the conflict in Ukraine. But I can't necessarily say the same thing when it comes to the conflict between Israel and Hamas. I will say that I think that our commander-in-chief at the moment is wholly unprepared for the level of conflict as more and more conflict is spreading across the globe. But at this moment, I don't believe that it is hyperbole to suggest that the United States could be headed towards a more global conflict, because of course, if you understand how World War I and World War II broke out, things started to escalate very quickly as more and more conflicts started to break out across the globe. It's starting in China and then in Europe, and of course the dragging in of the United States with the attack on Pearl Harbor. But this is danger territory, because it's better to have strong leadership than it is to have weak leadership, which should sound obvious. But for those of us who can't necessarily differentiate between strong leadership and sort of authoritarian style strongman politics, I will say that I believe that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in war. And Joe Biden is very much the gardener in war. Let's continue on with more of this, or with the beginning of this interview. Take a listen to this. This is where our commander-in-chief is at mentally.
Can you foresee U.S. troops in combat in this new Middle East war?
I don't think that's necessary. Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country.
Can you foresee?
Okay. Perhaps just a slip of the tongue, right? But we're not talking about a stutter here. He's saying that Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. He is exhausted. He is mentally incapable of handling his responsibilities as commander-in-chief. And obviously, he's not going to step down. But if the Democrats actually cared about this country, they would invoke the part of the Constitution that would allow them to declare the President of the United States to be mentally incapacitated and unable to carry out his duties. Let's hear this again, what he's saying. Listen closely to the leader of the free world.
The U.S. troops in combat in this new Middle East war?
I don't think that's necessary. Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country.
Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. I can't even suss out what the president is trying to say there. What is he actually trying to communicate? It's not even a situation where you can say, oh, it's some typical politician's dodge. Like, that is nonsense that's coming out of his mouth. Let's continue.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
Yikes. Cringe. Oh, God. So the president of the United States, who just completed saying that Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. Whose country? Which country? Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in their country? In our country? What are you trying to say there? And then he goes on to say, we can handle the security situation that's rapidly escalating out of control, far beyond measure in between Russia and Ukraine, with the United States coming down in support of Ukraine financially and militarily. Some say that American boots are already on the ground. And of course, if you understand how our intelligence agencies operate, you can bet that there are American intelligence agents on the ground. Of course, there are American citizens as well who have taken up the cause of Ukraine and on their own, well, there's what the word I'm looking for on this one is, but on their own, they have decided to go and to fight for Ukraine, which of course is their right as citizens to leave the United States and to go and do something like that. The hope, of course, is that the United States will not be dragged in. But President Biden seems to think that if Americans are dragged into this conflict, that we will be able to handle both of these conflicts at the time. I don't think so. This is not even Iraq or Afghanistan where you're fighting third world nations, and we can't even handle this. We're talking about getting involved in conflicts where second and first world nations with actual armies and actual militaries that can fight back strategically against the United States in something other than guerrilla warfare. In other words, there is a word for the type of warfare that is conventional warfare and then unconventional warfare that the military uses, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I am reaching out to some military officials like Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who will hopefully be on my show this week. We're just working out a time. If you're just tuning into the Wake Up America show, good morning. I'm your host, Austin Peterson. We're glad and grateful to have you here. You can text the show today and let us know what's on your mind, or if you think that there's a news story that we should be covering, or if there's breaking news. I can't always see what's going on in the world as we report on it, and I need you to be my eyes and ears. So text the show at 573-319-1586. That's 573-319-1586. If you text the show and let us know what's on your mind, you might have your voice read on air. Quest Fanning messaged in. He says, most folks have a normative level of happiness or misery and return to it almost automatically. Very true. He says the greatest losses, like a spouse or eyesight, usually take about 3 months to return to normal from. After that, for a long time, there'll be plenty of worse than normal moments for a while, but most moments will be normal. How we design our normal is key. That makes a good point. One listener texted in and said, I'm excited to get out of Minnesota. Finally headed back home to Texas. More freedom. I get you right there, my brother. Well, you don't like being represented by Ilhan Omar? You can, text the show today at 573-319-1586. Let us know how you feel. If you're just tuning into the Wake Up America show, good morning. I'm your host, Austin Peterson. I'd love it if you'd click like and subscribe to the channel. Come back and join us every Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central Time. At the moment right now, we're analyzing President Joe Biden's interview with 60 Minutes from last Friday. Let's take a listen to some more.
Do you support Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
And this is one of the major reasons why I do not support the United States intervening financially or militarily in this conflict. We can have diplomatic support for them and moral support for them, but I think it's a mistake because every dollar that the United States sends to Israel for whatever purpose comes with strings attached. Now, on one hand, one of the reasons why I don't support the United States defending Europe, for example, financially or militarily, is because I think that those European countries then turn around and rather than having to subsidize their own national defense, they use that to institute socialized medicine and socialism in their countries. Israel largely does this too. But another major reason why I don't think that the United States should be getting involved militarily or financially in the Middle East is because you have American presidents with these kinds of takes telling Israel what to do with their foreign policy. The United States treats Israel like a red-headed stepchild. And of course, if American taxpayer dollars are involved, you can completely understand why. And I've made this point before. I'll make it again. It very much rests on a similar notion to the idea of why here in the United States, people like ourselves largely support school choice. Why do we support school choice? Because these are our taxpayer dollars being used to pay for these government schools. And so therefore we say, well, if we're being forced to be taxed to pay for these public schools, then we get a say in how these schools are run. And that makes perfect sense. And I agree with that. The problem, of course, comes that when you take that mentality and you apply it to foreign policy rather than public schools, which is one thing, we're talking about a domestic question here. Of course, we shouldn't be funding public schools at all, and we should privatize the public education system. Can I get an amen on that? But when we're funding Israel and we're funding their military defense, and we're going to be telling them how to manage and maintain their defense, what they can or can't do. You have to understand that you have to consider a policy that might be in place whenever your worst enemy might actually be in charge of that policy. And of course, or the most inept leftist Democrat might be in charge of that policy. And this is what we're facing now with President Joe Biden, who is in charge of foreign policy over the Middle East, and he is completely inept.